Hey there, quarantines. Coming at you here with a very important question, which is, would February March? To which I answer, no, but April may. Okay, no, really, we got to talk about the market revolution. So today, really quickly, we're going to go over what is also known as the first industrial revolution. I like to call it the market revolution, although I believe College Board generally refers to it as the first industrial revolution. So just be heads up that those two terms can be used interchangeably, although at the end of the lecture today, I'll explain why there's a little bit of a differentiation there. So we're going to talk about this first industrial revolution. I was reading an article about it earlier today where I saw the term creeping mechanization, and I liked that idea because the first industrial revolution wasn't an immediate change. It was really more like a slow change. And so the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over some of these technological advances, and then we're going to go over the impacts of them on society, wrap it up with why it's called the market revolution sometimes, and then that'll be that for today. So some important technological advances that happened during the first industrial revolution. First of all, farming really changed. There were some notable inventions that were made on the farming front. For example, famously, Eli Whitney's cotton gin revolutionized the way cotton is processed and reaped. And so that led to a change in the Southern economy for sure. I mean, eventually, when we're talking about the colonial economies throughout the 1700s, we see a variety of cash crops that are being produced on plantations like rice in the Carolinas and tobacco in Virginia and indigo across Georgia. And all of those things were sure lucrative, but Eli Whitney's cotton gin changes the dynamics of the Southern economy. And now cotton is king. Cotton is what's going to be the most lucrative cash crop. And so that has a lot of far-reaching impacts across society. Not only is the cotton gin is not the only agricultural development that happens around the first industrial revolution and this creeping mechanization. We also have the mechanical reaper by McCormick, which is going to make reaping crops faster, and also John Deere. Yes, that John Deere. He develops the steel plow. So these are changes that are being made to farming. Now, in our class, I think you guys might remember that I consistently say that it sucks to be a farmer. And this is really like the creeping mechanization that's being described here is really the beginning of farming suckiness, right? So like right now it seems like the mechanization of the farm is slow and small and lucrative. And so we don't see any like mass overproduction or, economic distress caused by that mass overproduction, like a lot of what we're going to see in the second industrial revolution. But that's why I like that term creeping mechanization, because this mechanization of farms is going to have some impacts on farming later on down the road. So those are some significant some significant aspects of American life, specifically farming life, that's changing. But what's the first industrial revolution isn't just about how people stay on farms and change the way they farm. It also has to do with how people move around. So the steam engine is developed in the first industrial revolution. Robert Fulton develops the steam engine. And so you start to see a change in how people move things around, like on steamboats, through canals. There's a transportation revolution in this time period too. Steam engines also can run railroads. So you start to see the beginning of the railroad economy in the early 1800s under this first industrial revolution. It's, again, I really like the way to think of it as creeping mechanization. It wasn't a huge, major, sudden change, but slowly our economy is changing and how we move around with the development of the steam engine. Slowly farming is changing and how they reap and develop their crops with the steel plow and the mechanical reaper and the cotton gin. So like all of this mechanization is creeping up on society. But definitely it's happening, right? And so also that's changing. Some other inventions that's noted is the loom, right? And how textile mills are really the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. And so textile mills, instead of people weaving their own clothing, now textiles are cloths. And so now we have this huge major change in where people are getting cloth and clothing. And so textile mills and textile factories are a majorly important development in the first industrial revolution too. And we're going to get back to that too. Sam Slater has the factory system that now, there's a whole new way to make things, right? And so all of this is happening. This is collectively the first industrial revolution, the mechanization of farming with the cotton gin and the mechanical reaper and the steel plow, the revolution around how we move around the country with steamboats and the steam engine and railroads, right? Those things are changing. The first industrial revolution is collectively known as this change, the development of textile mills and how we make cloths. Also, how we communicate with each other is changing. Sam Morris develops the telegraph in this time period. And so absolutely, like American society starts to see this change towards a more industrial lifestyle. But it's a small change. It's the first industrial revolution. So there's not a whole bunch of, when we think of the Gilded Age and the Second Industrial Revolution, the First Industrial Revolution is much more of that creeping mechanization. It's like the first step towards living in an industrial society, but we still have a long ways to go. So a couple of things I want to note. So that's the basis of what is the First Industrial Revolution. It's all of these new inventions, the mechanization of society, from farms to textile mills to transportation to how we communicate. That's a huge, big change. But let's talk about what made these changes possible. And so I think we tend in America, in U.S. history, we tend to think of these inventors as totally on their own. They invented, John Deere invented this thing, and Sam Slater invented this system. Although, these people were not operating in a vacuum. And so what's notable is that the United States government really supported this move towards industrialization to start off with, mostly through patent laws. And so patents protect inventions, and they promote inventions as well. And so the United States government, with these new inventions are being protected by patent laws, it's important to note the role of the government in the industrial process. Also, the government develops limited liability, which encourages people to take financial risks in businesses when they might not otherwise. Limited liability means that I can't be held responsible for the entire business. I can only be held responsible for my individual share of that business if it were to go bankrupt. So therefore, that mitigates my risk, right? I'm more likely to invest in this business because my whole life can't be wrecked by that business if it goes under. Only my portion of the shares can be lost if that business were to go under. So limited liability, patent laws, this is all examples of the role that the government took to encourage the industrial process. Industrialization didn't happen on its own, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. The government 100% encouraged all of those things. Now let's talk about some of the far-reaching impacts of the first industrial revolution. I would say one that this needs to be noted, the population of the United States in this time period doubles. From in the early 1800s, the United States population doubles. And a lot of that has to do with immigration. This is when we see the wave of immigrants from Ireland as a result of famine there, and from Germany. And so you see a huge major rise in population on the immigrant front, especially from Ireland and Germany. Additionally, it's interesting, the slave trade is ended in 1808. we're, as a country, are no longer allowed to import slaves. That's illegal now. However, the population of the number of slaves in the country still rose after that. And a lot of that probably has to do with how lucrative the cotton industry had become with the development of the cotton gin. So although the import of slaves is now over in the United States, the population of the number of slaves in America still rose. And you see an impact of that in American society in the form of nativism. This is the first documented time that the United States of America, formally as the United States of America, has like this nativist backlash. The Irish and German immigrants faced a lot of hardships whenever they came to America, seeking opportunity, seeking economic opportunity. And Americans definitely reacted in a nativist, xenophobic way. Like there was not a welcome party for these new immigrants. And so the population rising in both enslaved individuals and people working for wages is a huge impact of the first industrial revolution. Additionally, women were impacted by the first industrial revolution in the form of gaining some economic opportunity outside the home as young women, as young girls. Some textile mills specifically targeted young girls as a labor source. So most notable for that is the Lowell mills in Massachusetts. Lowell girls were mostly farm girls who were invited to come live at the Lowell mill. So they would work like 6 hours. They would work 6 days a week. They would work from sun up to sundown. They were escorted everywhere they went, escorted to church, which is basically the only place they were allowed to go. They had like house mothers where they were watched, and they did not get their wages. Their wages were sent back to their families. So it wasn't like they were working for their own wages. So Lowell girls, factory girls, so like there's like this small economic opportunity for women outside the home. However, it was very, very limited in the form that the women did not actually get their wages. They didn't actually get any sense of freedom. They were their whole lives were micromanaged, and also it was really grueling labor in the textile mills. Lowell was the most famous there in Massachusetts. So mostly women were now, we see the change in the idea of Republican motherhood in the early republic, where women were greeted with this like new sense of national pride. They were in charge of raising citizens with Republican motherhood. They were in charge of making sure, they were educating citizens that could operate in democracy. And you see a shift from that Republican motherhood under this first industrial revolution to the cult of domesticity. So the home is now the place for the woman in this society. Although there's like this super limited opportunity outside the home with textile mills, for the most part, women are relegated to, cooking and cleaning and child rearing and in the home, right? That's the cult of domesticity. That's mostly how this first industrial revolution is impacting women. So let's talk about why I like to call it the market revolution, and this has to do with the home specifically. The first industrial revolution is not a bad way to refer to this time period. It's creeping mechanization. It's like this slow change towards a more mechanized society, but really significant changes. I mean, not to be understated, right? The start of the mechanization of farms, the transportation revolution with the development of steamboats and the textile mills, and the telegraph. All of that is hugely important developments in the industrialization of American society, but it's a creeping mechanization. It's a slow change. What's most significant about this time period, though, is how people think about the home, right? And that's why I like to call it the market revolution, because the home in American society, if you think back to Jefferson's ideal of the yeoman farmer, people who subsist from the land, most Americans were essentially subsistence farmers. The home was a place of economic cooperation, right? I mean, that's where you made your own goods, where you created your, churning the butter and making your clothes and preparing the farm. Everybody in the family had a role to play in the family economy, and the home was the center of that economic cooperation. However, as with this creeping mechanization, as the development of wage labor becomes a thing and textile mills and people start working outside the home changes. Home is no longer the center of economic cooperation. It's now a refuge from work or a place of rest. It's somewhere you come back to after you've worked. And I think that's like what we think of home today. We leave the house. Well, we used to leave the house. I don't know if we're ever going to do that again, but we used to leave the house, go to work, go to school, and then we come home to like this refuge, a place that is apart from society or apart from our job or apart from school. Home used to be where everything happened, and now home is apart from where everything happens. And that is the market, right? Instead of creating all your stuff, now you're going to the store to buy stuff that was made in a factory by a stranger far, far away. So the way you buy and sell things, the way you get stuff, the way you get clothes, the way you get food, the way you get tables and chairs, the market is revolutionizing in the early 1800s, and a lot of that is centered around how people think of the home. Now, this market revolution, aka the Industrial Revolution, is going to have far-reaching impacts on society that we are going to tackle in the next lecture when we start talking about how do people react to these changes, because these are really big, giant changes, right? People are going from having like cottage systems where they're making their own stuff or having their home as their economic center, to going out and buying things, to working outside the home. Even those who continue to farm, their farming changes with the cotton gin and the mechanical reaper and the steel plow. How people move around, the rise of railroads and steamboats, all of these things are hugely revolutionizing American society, and there's going to be far-reaching impacts for that. So we're going to get into that next. But for right now, see you later.